We begin with new information on the assault of a man in Grafton. You heard this story first right here on Valley News Live last week. 3 men have now been charged in the brutal beating of Curtis Graver on April 3rd. Jason Garza, Jacob Garza, and Cristobal Garza were arrested for felony aggravated assault. Carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. Documents say the assault happened outside the Last Chance bar in Grafton when the 3 Garza men pulled Graver out of his vehicle and started to beat him. Police haven't said what led to the beatings. Graver told our news team last week what happened was a senseless act of violence and that he wasn't even robbed. Investigators say this is an ongoing case and there are no further details to share at this time. Well, outside, the sun has finally peeked out this afternoon, but our First Alert Storm Team has their eyes on a major spring storm which may be with us for a few days this week. Hutch, looks like it could even bring some heavy snow.
You know, it does look like this will be the most impactful winter event that we had all season. I know it isn't winter, but this one comes with a huge punch of snow. One of the things about it that makes it so impactful is that it lasts from Tuesday for some of us into Friday for some of us. And believe me, we're going to see a range of snowfall potential. So a lot of times I hear pokes and jabs at area meteorologists, 0 to 72 inches or somewhere in there. Well, take a look at this. Impacts first. Major storm, very wet, a lot of moisture with it. So it's going to be creating some heavy snow. Over 18 inches in our viewing area is going to be likely. 45-mile-per-hour gusts will cause blizzard conditions. Power outages when we get wind and heavy snow are a thing, so be prepared for these things. Fill up that car with gas, alter or cancel your travel plans, or be ready to do so, or be ready to stay somewhere where you're stranded for a few days. Those survival kits, a must. Land and air travel impacts possible. Check with your flights as we go through the event. Closures on the Valley News Live website. And if you are in agriculture, prepare for very strong and gusty northwest winds and drifts measured 5 to 10 feet with rising river levels on the outside of this storm. Here's a quick look at the snowfall potential. The farther south and east you go, not much worries the way things look now. Heavy snow where you see the whites up to around 40 inches of snow in the central Dakotas and out west where it's badly needed. This area here, quite a ramp, anywhere from 3 inches to a foot. And any shift in the track of this storm, and remember it's over 4 days, will make changes to how much snow you get. And Fargo sits right in that zone of uncertainty. And it's because it's a 4-day event, but we will have blizzard conditions west. They will be crippling. We will have lower snowfall south and east. We'll keep you updated. I'll have an hour-by-hour forecast here for you in just a couple of moments.
We got a lot to talk about. Thanks, Hutch. Armed, dangerous, and still on the loose. Police are looking for a man suspected in the shooting on 11th Avenue in Pelican Rapids. The Otter Tail County Sheriff's Office says Futhasa Prathane is believed to be driving a black 2011 Toyota Tundra pickup with Minnesota tags. If you see this man, they say, call 911. Do not approach him. The victim was shot in the leg. Police say they are in stable condition. The West Fargo man accused of throwing a deadly punch that killed the father of 6 has now pleaded guilty. 36-year-old Tomas Cervantes pleaded guilty this morning to felony manslaughter and death of 53-year-old Roberto Balboa. Police say the assault happened last August when both Balboa and Cervantes were at a concert at the Speedway Event Center in West Fargo. Court documents say Balboa was pushed by someone, turned around to see who did it, and was struck in the face, knocked out, hit the floor, the concrete floor with his head. Cervantes' sentencing date has not yet been set. A former assistant track and cross-country coach for Oak Grove will now have to register as a sex offender and spend time in jail after being convicted of child porn charges. 35-year-old Daniel Stoa was sentenced to 60 days behind bars following 2 years of supervised probation. Court documents say the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children got a tip from Twitter in January after 2 photos of children posing in provocative manners were uploaded to its servers. Investigators later found more images in the user's Twitter messages. Authorities say Stoa admitted to being the account owner of that Twitter page. Authorities in Nelson County are searching for a burglary suspect this evening. Authorities say someone broke into several businesses along Main Street in Lakota this weekend. A dark 4-door sedan is considered a vehicle of interest. If you have any information about these burglaries, please contact police. Ukraine is warning citizens in eastern Ukraine to leave ahead of a renewed Russian invasion in that part of their country. Reporters on the ground say Russia has pulled its forces out of northern Ukraine and is now redirecting them to the east. U.S. officials say Russia has now also appointed a new general to lead the war in Ukraine. He's the same general who was in charge of the Russian charge in Syria, where Russia is accused of war crimes.
Those same brutal tactics, that same disregard for civilian life and civilian infrastructure will probably continue as they now focus in a more geographically confined area in the Donbass.
Mariupol's mayor tells the Associated Press more than 10,000 civilians have been killed in that city alone as the fighting rages on. CBS News has learned nearly 10,000 undocumented Ukrainians have now been processed by U.S. border officials just in the last 2 months. The Department of Homeland Security says many of those refugees traveled to Mexico, hoping to then request refuge in the U.S. Today, President Biden and the Justice Department announced new executive regulations to address homemade weapons known as ghost guns. Their goal is to classify them the same way they do regular firearms. The president also introduced his pick to lead the federal agency charged with enforcing gun laws and requirements. Deborah Alfarone has more from the White House.
From the Rose Garden at the White House, President Biden proposed new rules to regulate the manufacture and sale of ghost guns.
This is the gun. It's not hard to put together.
Ghost guns are homemade firearms that can be assembled using a 3D printer or with kits purchased online. They lack serial numbers, which makes it impossible for law enforcement to trace. The new proposed rules would require gun makers to include serial numbers, be federally licensed, run background checks, and keep purchase records as long as they are in business.
Because of these updates, law enforcement will have additional crime gun intelligence to stop gun violence.
The new regulations are likely to face lawsuits from manufacturers and gun rights groups. Monday, the president also announced the nomination of Steve Dettelbach to the head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF. President Biden nominated the former Ohio U.S. attorney after he pulled his previous nominee due to bipartisan concerns from lawmakers.
I promise to support the men and the women of the ATF and to do everything in our power to protect the people of this nation every single day.
If confirmed, Dettelbach would become the first permanent ATF director in 7 years. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, the White House.
Meanwhile, the White House continues to call on Congress to pass gun legislation, but that's not likely to happen in the divided U.S. Senate, where some Republican lawmakers have already come out against the president's new ghost guns rules, referencing the Second Amendment. The White House's COVID-19 response coordinator says the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is coming up with a scientific framework to decide on that transportation mask mandate. You remember the federal mandate is still in place for places like planes, trains, and scheduled to expire on April 18th. An update on this mask mandate is expected to be released later this week. As the strict COVID lockdown in China drags on, anger is now boiling into the streets. CBS Tina Kraus is in London with more on this growing unrest.
This man in Shanghai is showing he's had enough of the COVID lockdown. In a furious rant caught on camera, he says, the government is driving ordinary people to revolt. There is no way for me to live. While countries around the world are lifting pandemic restrictions, China is sticking to its zero COVID strategy of tackling outbreaks with mandatory isolation and mass testing. Shanghai has enforced some of the most rigid rules since the virus emerged in Wuhan in 2019. 25 million residents have been forced to stay put, not even allowed to walk their dogs. The only canines permitted on city streets are robots, broadcasting tips on how to avoid infection. Under growing pressure to ease the lockdown, which has left many people without enough food, the government said Monday residents in neighborhoods with the fewest infections will soon be able to leave their homes. But scenes like this of people screaming from their windows show an end to the strict COVID controls can't come soon enough. Tina Kraus, CBS News.
The State Department's warning U.S. citizens to rethink traveling to parts of China as they could risk being separated from family members if one of them tests positive for COVID-19. China again has softened its controversial policy a bit that forced parents who didn't have the virus to hand over children to mass quarantine centers. Still to come on Valley News Live at 4.